Welcome to week 2 lecture. This week groups 1 and 2 made their presentations, and thank you so much for making the presentation for the first time at the beginning of the semester. It is always difficult to do things first, but I really appreciate group 1 and 2's effort to make the presentation especially within this really limited time frame. And in this lecture today, I will make a comment on group 1 and 2's presentations. And after that, I will add some things that I want to highlight. Okay, let's start with group 1's presentation first. It had really nice PPTs with a very good layout, and it has this presenter's face image showing along with the name in like a small window in each PowerPoint in each slide, and was verbally very clear presentation. How to improve group 1's presentation? First, it's good to have proper introduction and conclusion, and in the introduction you can briefly introduce the presentation, what's coming next, and group members as well as group members. And the main point of the presentation is showing these 3 themes or 3 perspectives or aspects that highlight the relationship between the reading and the film, right? So in that aspect, I think the 3rd aspect showed the link between the reading and the film, but I think first 2 can do a better job to show this relationship between the reading and the film. And I will, after I made a comment on the group 2's presentation, I will explain maybe how to do this better or more effectively. And in terms of discussion questions, please add your own group's answers to the discussion questions. So as I explained in our first class meeting, if we are doing this presentation in class, you can just ask questions. We can have like discussions, actual class discussions, but since we're pre-recording this presentation, so providing your own answers to your questions will be helpful. And actually it was also good to have some video clips added in, and at the end the reference list, it was really good. And between the sections you need to add transitional works, like, oh, next is coming this, and now I'm talking about this. Like, each section, when the transition happens, you kind of need to, let the audience know that, you're making the transition, right? Okay, let's move on to the group 2's presentation. This presentation has good intro, proper intro, and the conclusion, right? So it was good. And actually in the introduction, it introduced the presentation well, but it would be nice to introduce the group members as well, right? And in terms of this linkage between the reading and the film, the third theme section shows this link well. And also discussion question 1, this group, they not only provided the questions, but they also provided answers, right? Discussion question 1 and answer section also kind of linked the reading and the film. That it was really well done. There were some transitional works, but more would have been helpful, right? And at the end, the reference list was missing. So overall, these presentations are, well done, especially considering these 2 are very first presentations, right? And thank you again, group 1 and 2 members. Okay, so how to link the reading to the film or vice versa? So think of the answers to the following questions when you come up with your the main section, right? So think of these questions first. How does the film exemplify the main argument of the readings? So you have to figure it out, like 3 main arguments, and then go back to the film and see how these arguments are exemplified, right? Well, next question, how do the film and the reading complement each other? Or the next question, how do the film and the reading provide identical or similar or different perspectives about the same topic, theme, or aspect, right? So in other words, compare the central themes of the films and of the reading, of the film and the reading. Does the reading focus on the same themes as the film? Are there differences in how they are explored, right? Or like look for points where the film and the reading or article agree on key ideas, concepts, or messages. Do they both make similar arguments or highlight the same issues, right? So think of, how to answer these questions. It's like a very, although most questions ask the same things, but in terms of organizing your main section, these three main themes or aspects section, right? About how the reading and the film are related or linked, right? And in presenting your findings about this relationship, right, add the references like specific page numbers of the reading from the reading or the timestamp from the film, right? Along with some quotes from the reading or the film, right? Okay, so moving on to the next section, I want you to think about this about today's topic about this sex slave or so-called comfort woman. They won an official apology from the Japanese government about the wrongdoings done upon them, right, during the wartime. And so what does this is that kind of apology, is it enough, right? If Japanese government makes this very official apology, right, admitting their wrongdoings and all that, then do you think the kind of justice is served if that kind of apology is made, right? But then if that is not enough, how can justice be served, right? Now, recent news said there are only 5 surviving comfort women, among Korean comfort women, right? So they are really now old, and most of them already passed away, and only 5 survived, right? So for these 5 surviving old Korean women, is the apology enough? If it's not, what can be done to make justice, be served, right? So my, personal opinion, I think true justice, okay, so someone did something bad to someone else, right? Saying just, I'm sorry, I did this wrong, is not enough, right? You need to be punished for your wrongdoings, whether it's accidental or voluntary or involuntary, right? You need to be punished, right? That's how justice can be served. So, whoever responsible, I don't know, there's still also maybe many of them passed away, like many comfort women already passed away. They need to identify who are those individuals who are responsible for, right? And then they need to be punished. They need legal, whatever, legally they need to go to to the court, and they need to be sentenced for their the appropriate punishment legally, right, for their wrongdoings, right? Okay, so this happened many years ago, right? And it's really a lot of you, if you didn't know about this dark side of the history, you got shocked or appalled, and how could something bad like this happen, right? But then even though the fact is fact, right? But then the fact is not just fact, because there are people providing different interpretations about what happened. So now this fact, there are different ways of talking about or understanding what really happened. So it's kind of a controversy, right? And recently there was this professor at Harvard Law School called Mark Ramsayer, and he's his major is Japanese legal studies, and he got like a scholarships from the Japanese government and so on in the past, right? And he wrote this paper about comfort women, and the title was Contracting for Sex in the Pacific War in late 2020. So it was not many years ago, right? So as you can see in the title, he's arguing that it's based on contract. So these women were not forced. They voluntarily participated with with this contract, right? So they're hired and they wanted to do it and they got paid and they get they made money, right? That's the essence of his paper, right? So he just didn't use any other source other than just Japanese nationalist argument. So in Japan, some right-wing nationalist, people, politicians and scholars, they don't really admit, there was a sex slave. They're just arguing that, it was just voluntary work, right? So he's this professor, Mark Ramseyer, is just adopting Japanese nationalist argument, ignoring historical evidence, right? And it's just he ignored the survivors' testimony, describing the it was forced and was abused and it was actually slavery, right, against their will. So the film was about they can now break their silence and they can now talk about it, right? But even though you talk about it, if it is not heard by the other side, then you are still silenced, right? Not heard equals to silenced. They were, it took so many years for them to actually speak up because, the even when they came back, they had to hide what happened because they were stigmatized. They lost their, they were whatever this Confucianist and chastity ideology. Woman cannot be, violated, and it's their fault even though they were forced, right? So they had to hide their past, right, in pain. But they finally spoke up. Some of them finally spoke up, but people like Mark Ramseyer will not listen to them, right? Ignore what they say. So this kind of people with this kind of argument keep this woman silenced, force them to still be silenced, right? So this controversy kind of shows how important the scholarship should be. And you have to have these ethical considerations, especially when you deal with when you're in the field of historical research, right? And again, history is not something about what happened in the past. What happened in the past is not as a static thing. We may think that just happened. That's a fact. How can you deny it? But you can deny it, like Mark Ramsey or a Japanese, nationalist, saying that was not true. It was not slavery. It was voluntary, and they made money, and it helped them, right? So it's a dialogue between the past and the present, and we have to be really careful, who has the voice, whose voice can be heard, right? And then this is his face, and the right side is the journal article he wrote, right? And then okay, this Professor Ramseyer is a pro-Japanese scholar, American scholar, right? But then what's appalling is that there are Korean scholars just like him, right? And there's this Korean government. The current President Yoon, last name Yoon Suk-yeol, his government is very pro-Japanese, right? So it's rewriting history again. History is not about something happened in the past, something about just facts, right? So he's trying to kind of waive or erase Japan's responsibility for wartime actions, the wrongdoings, right? And his government, asked there not only the sex slavery, but there were like a lot of forced labor. Like a lot of Korean people were forced to work for Japanese mines or things like that, right? So this government, instead of asking Japanese government compensate those like forced labor, those people who were forced to work in, for example, a Japanese mine, just this government said like in a Korean third party just compensate for them, right? So like a kind of giving just forgiveness to the Japanese government, right? And also recently this government made this appointment of head of this the Academy of Korean Studies, this scholar called Kim Na-gyun, right? And he wrote a lot of like pieces of academic pieces like the Ramsey writing his article, and argue that Japanese colonization helped Korea, right? Helped Korea become modernized, right? So ignoring all this, what was done to Korean people during the colonization, a lot of people were forced to do the labor or sex slavery work, things like that, and a lot of Korean resources were taken, like rice and other resources, right? But then, the Japanese government, colonial government, put a railway for South Korea. For Korea. Sorry, not South Korea then, so that it modernized the country. But the reason why they built the railroad was to take these resources away from Korea, right? And then also there's a place called the Independence Hall of Korea, right? The independence means independence from Japanese colonization. So this place, he appointed Kim Hyung-suk as a new president of the Independence Hall. But this person justified Japanese colonial rule of Korea that was legal, right? Saying it. And there are a lot of pro-Japanese collaborators. They're Korean but work for Japanese government, right? But he defended these pro-Japanese collaborators during the colonial time, right? So this government is appointing all these new directors or president to these government institutions and things like that, and they're all pro-Japanese scholars, right? So so there's movement called New Right, and these two scholars and the President Yoon, they are key personnel in this New Right movement. So what is the New Right movement in South Korea? They're evaluating Japanese colonial rule as something good for Korea. That colonial rule modernized Korea, right? And they ignore this negative impact of Japanese colonial rule and justifies or defend this collaboration with Japanese imperialism, right? And then also they use anti-communist rhetoric to attack the political opposition, right? So the next week's topic will be about a Korean War, right? So we will deal with North Korea's communist government and South Korea democratic government, and the conflict between North and South, right? But this President Yoon will just accuse the political opposition leader as that's very pro communist, right? So they're kind of abusing this. Their enemy is all just communist. They consider that way, right? And this appointment of the New Right figures to the key government positions, that has a lot of implications, right? So the new for example, textbooks, history textbooks, not only in Japan, some Japanese textbooks were criticized that they're not acknowledging, what they did wrong during the wartime, right? It's not only Japanese textbooks, but the Korean history textbooks are defending Japanese colonial rule, saying that was good thing to Korea, right? Things like that, right? So it has a lot of implications. It's not about, who is the president of what, right? And the recent Korean government pro-Japanese actions, they support the idea that Japan's colonization of Korea was lawful. There was nothing was wrong, right? And that's the same as the Japanese right wing, Japanese nationalist. That's the same argument exactly, right? So the Korean government adopt the same ideology as the Japanese nationalist argument, right? And like even like this Korean government pushed to commemorate 1948 as the first year of the South Korea, right? South Korea as national foundation, but actually, it is now 1948, right? So it's the Japanese colonial occupation was from 1910 to 1945, right? And so if there was no government before 1948, then there was no South Korea. There was no Korea, right? So before it was just only the South Koreans are all Japanese citizens. If you argue that there's no South Korea before 1948, right? So what these comfort women, sex slaves or forced laborers from Korea did was not like they were not forced; they're just participating just because they were Japanese, right? So this South Korean government currently is trying to change the South Korea's national foundation year to 1948. They didn't like 1910. That's what Japanese nationalists wanna argue, right? So it just what's happening is just appalling, right? And so this government, is this really South Korean government or is just a Japanese government even, right? And there are a lot of criticism and a lot of concerns about what the current South Korean government is doing with this history, right? Actually, there are other, moving on, there are other films dealing with the same issue, like Spirit Homecoming, Her Story, I Can Speak, The Apology, Within Every Woman, Give Me the Sun, things like that. And now, like we have to think about again whose voice is gonna be heard, right? If Korean government is doing all these things, like pro-Japanese things, whose voice will be heard loud? Whose voice will be silenced, right? People in power or organizations in power with more power, right? You can speak up and you can make other people hear your voice, right? If you're powerless, even though you speak, your voice will not be heard and you will be kept silenced, right? And now I want to end this lecture with sharing this interview that I did with UBC student, and she had this she had a class with a professor there, misrepresenting or not misrepresenting the comfort woman issue in the class. So she fought for to make her voice heard or to represent the comfort woman's voice, to help comfort woman's voice heard. So I want to share that interview with you. Thank you so much for your time. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Sarah Wan, and I'm currently a third year student majoring in Asian Studies at UBC.
Okay, so the reason why I wanna ask you to have this time was because I heard that you had this worth sharing incident or experience regarding the comfort woman issue, right? So can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, so in my first year at UBC, I took a Japanese cultural anthropology course. And during that time, we came upon the topic of comfort woman. It was during this class that the professor introduced comfort women as girls who had been sent off to marriage during the Japanese colonial period. However, this
Right.
is not correct. And I do say this not only as a Korean who has grown up seeing the lasting effects of Japanese colonization, but also as an Asian studies major who has studied the subject of Japanese annexation of Korea and comfort woman. Comfort woman is a term that is used to call the young girls, not only from Korea, but also from many other countries such as China, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, Philippines, etc., some even from Europe, and some of these girls being as young as 11 or 12 years old, and they were forcefully taken as sex slaves for the Japanese soldiers during the Japanese colonial period. So I spoke up regarding that during class, correcting the term that my professor had used at that time, saying that these girls were extremely young and they were never sent off to marriage, but that they were forcefully taken away from their families and to become sex slaves in brothels.
Mm-hmm.
The professor then wanted my proof for my statement,
Mm-hmm.
and I told her that we are the proof. We are the survivors, and we are the proof. The voices of the victims that we have heard are the proof. Our history is the proof. And while I understand that this course is a Japanese anthropology course, and the professor most likely had learned this period of history
Right.
through the Japanese lens, it was
Mhm.
still, in my opinion, even more so that as a professor, it is important to correctly teach the issue of comfort women and the Japanese colonial period for what they were, as girls who were, as very, very young girls who were forcefully taken as sex slaves during that time.
Right. Okay, so what happened next?
So, what I had to do was I essentially went to a different professor of mine, a professor of Korean studies and Korean literature, and I told them the gist of what had happened, and he actually helped me in sending an email to that professor with novels and with books that had been written or written about comfort woman, translated by him or translated by himself or translated even by other professors, and he has sent all of that documentation to that Japanese anthropology professor as the sources, as the proof of my statement during that time. So after that, the following class, that professor had corrected that these young girls were indeed very, very young, but still then the professor had refused to accept the idea that they were sent as sex slaves and had still, in her words, said that at that time it was very normal for girls that age to be sent off to marriage, which still, in my opinion, is not the correct term to be used because they were not sent off to marriage. They weren't sent off to a family to be married, to be a wife. They were sent off to brothels to be sex slaves to Japanese soldiers at that
Right.
time.
I see. So the professor had never really corrected
Yes.
the use of the term. I see. And I heard you got some kind of award, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't an official award. It was just a very minor,
Uh-huh.
just because the Korean literature and the Korean modern literature professor that I had wanted to give little awards out to everybody in the class at the end of the term, just as like a congratulations for getting through the term. And the award that he gave me was called the Sang, which essentially translates to Righteousness Award, Righteous Army Award. So for fighting for the comfort woman, and that has been something that I've always been doing throughout my entire life, fighting for, I guess not necessarily fighting publicly for it, but trying to raise awareness regarding comfort women, raise awareness regarding issues like the rising sun flag, issues that aren't really talked about within when talking about Korean culture and history, just because as much as the Korean culture and Korean society is becoming a lot more popular globally, I do truly believe that it's still very, very important to highlight such aspects, such issues of Korean history as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, is there anything that you want your fellow students to know about the comfort woman issue?
For sure. So while Korea is becoming increasingly recognized, just like I have previously mentioned, globally through the effects of K-pop, Korean food, Korean music, Korean culture, so on, I do believe that I hope that it creates space to also shed some light onto Korea and its history and its relations with others, especially when it comes to things such as the comfort woman, such as the Japanese colonial period, just such as the rising sun flag, just because this this history is not something that had happened centuries and centuries ago. It's considering that the Japanese annexation of Korea took place between 1910 to 1945, it has directly affected many of our grandparents, and there are still survivors. There are still even 9 comfort women that are still left. They're still fighting. They're still trying to get their apology that they have never received formally from the Japanese government. They're still waiting for a lot more. We're still waiting to get shed light on all of these issues within Korea and externally as well. So I really hope that because the after effects of these, because this has directly affected us, continues to affect us as a community, as a society, and as a country. I hope that my experience is also just one of the small but many steps to create awareness and to hopefully change the future in terms of the how that history and how those issues are recognized in the world.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. And
It's
I
my
just it's out of curiosity, I know that you're a big fan of Japanese anime and all that, right? So you kind of, appreciate some aspect of Japanese, I should say, popular culture, right? So how do you see that, there's this past of, colonization of Japan, I mean, from Japan toward Korea, right? But then now young people really don't care about this, what happened, but, they can be friends and they can appreciate each other's culture, right? So do you see any, how it works, right? In your own experience.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually do really like Japanese anime. I like Japanese culture. My experiences with Comfort Woman and my all of that does not it's still there. How it I believe it's important is that even though I like Japanese culture, even though I like Japanese anime and all that stuff and Japanese music, it still should not take away the fact that what has happened, what has happened has happened. So it's still
Mhm.
very, very important to still recognize that and still fight for that. Because one of the examples that I kind of want to bring up is, for example, there are still a lot of Japanese, especially nowadays, the young Japanese generation. There's actually a lot of Japanese people. There's a lot of Korean people that are actually unaware that
Mhm.
these are bad things. For example, in anime, in a lot of uh, Japanese cultural kind of significance, they use the rising sun flag. A lot
Mhm.
of the times they don't realize that that is not acceptable in terms of in historically that it was used as the Navy Imperial Navy flag
Mhm.
during the colonial period. So
Right.
for for colonized countries such as Korea and other Asian countries, that flag is a war flag. And while many people still use that flag in Japan, a lot of the times they use it without realizing the significance of that flag
Right.
to
Right.
other countries and other cultures. So in those cases, when I do see things like that appear in anime or, for example, in other media, I I know that the majority of the times they don't mean it. They use it because for Japan that's just a I believe it's a fisherman's flag as well. It's just a flag that they use when they are sailing, but because they are
Right.
not taught properly that the significance of this flag to in terms of history, that
Yeah.
kind
So
of
even sometimes even some Korean K-pop stars or other Korean celeb, they may sometimes use that flag, right? Without
yes.
really knowing that too. So that's a
So
good
it's not
point.
just
So
I don't want to critique it as it's only a problem within Japan. It's a problem globally as well. It's a problem even with
right.
Korea. It's just a matter of not being educated enough. It's just a matter of not spreading enough awareness these as about these flags, about these issues, about the comfort woman. So I do
Right.
believe that even though, for example, in my case, even though I like anime, even though I like Japanese music,
Mhm.
it still doesn't change the fact that
Right.
what has happened has to be recognized, and
Right.
we still have to do something. Like we still have to raise that awareness to change history. To well, sorry, we can't change history, but we can change the future. So we have to change what we can do
Right.
now, which is
So
spread
I think
awareness.
you're a really good example that even though there's this kind of between Korea and Japan, there was this kind of dark past, but it doesn't mean that we cannot be friends. But at the same time, even though we appreciate each other's culture and we are friends, it doesn't mean that we can forget about the past, right? So yeah, okay. Okay, thank you so much for your time, and I hope my own students appreciate your experience, and it'll give them some things to think about, right? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, this is it for today's lecture. Thank you so much for your time, and I think this week's lecture is a little bit longer than usual because I added an interview clip. I hope you found this interview interesting and really gives you something to think about as well. And thank you for your time and attention.